Hi, it's Ary Rosenbaum here with another episode of that 401k podcast. The first one for 2020. It's a new year. It's that time of the year. Dan Vintori's not here this week. Holidays, unfortunately, when you have school age kids, at least in my situation, their vacation obviously becomes now my vacation. That of course, is a little bit hairy when you have responsibilities and drafting last minute plain documents and getting new clients and all that other kind of stuff. But that's what happens. The Christmas break, as usual, kids. At least my kids can't sit at home and do things. They need to be entertained. So obviously we saw Star Wars when the vacation kind of started, and took them to some other movies. Saw Little Women. That was a nice little fun movie. Jumanji. And all that kind of stuff. And of course, the holiday of Hanukkah. And I don't know about you. I really don't know where they came up with this, get a gift a day thing. When I was a kid, you got a couple of gifts, and that was it. I don't know where somebody developed the gift a day thing. Of course, unfortunately for my wallet, my kids have discovered that long ago, and not only do they get one gift a day, they get 2 to 3 gifts a day. And of course, that of course, um, you know, is an issue. And of course, for me to pay for that, it's a nice segue to talk about the conferences and the events that we're going to have in 2020. The very first conference in 2020 is going to be at Disney World, that 401k National Conference, Walt Disney World Swan, March 10th to the 11th, 2020. Go to that 401ksite.com for further information on how to sign up. We have some good rates to buy Disney tickets, to reserve hotel rooms, and pretty soon we're going to have the agenda out, which is a good fit for you if you're a TPA or a financial advisor to sign up. Ways to grow your business, and some new interesting ways. We'll have some athlete appearances, and we're going to have, like I said, the Retireaholics will be there with a video cast, which should be a lot of fun. So bring your kids, bring your wives, guaranteed to have the time of your life. And of course, that's the words to Meet the Mets. But it's a great way, bring your family. Other cities you may not want to bring the kids, but there's no happier place in the world than Disney World, at least in my opinion. And what we have after that is the regional events. We got Houston on April 17th. We have St. Louis on May the 8th. And we have on June the 5th, we will be in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Of course, in April, we will be at Minute Maid Park. In May, we will be at Busch Stadium. And in June, we will be at Target Field. Go to that 401ksite.com. This is a great advisor event. The 401k National Conference, of course, is open to TPAs and advisors. The 401k Conference is for advisors to learn and how to grow their business and learn some interesting things along the way. Should be a great time at these events. We got some game tickets, of course, for games that night. We'll bring in a former great for, obviously for Houston, it's going to be the Astros. St. Louis will be the Cardinals, and Minnesota will be the Twins. And go to that 401ksite.com for further information. $100 to sign up. If you're a plan provider and wants to sponsor, sponsorships start for these local events as little as $500. And to speak, it's $1,500. I guess a lot of people would say, shouldn't be advertising that kind of stuff, but I'm really transparent, big fan of that, and just want to show you that it's not cost prohibitive to sponsor these events. It's a lot of fun. Everybody has a great time, and it's a memorable event, and people have a great time in networking, and of course, in meeting up. Mike Webb, of course, we always throw a shout out to him, always attending our events, and it's always great to see him. So we will see him in Disney World as well, and hopefully we'll see him in some of the other events as the year and schedule allow him to do that. This week's topic, I want to talk about some of the stuff that I've been doing and working on, and really that's on the compliance end. Some of the issues that I've seen on voluntary compliance issues, as well as Department of Labor issues as well. So it's really an insight into some of the screw ups that I currently see, which to me is a great gauge of what's really going on uh, in the retirement plan space in terms of foul ups, bleeps, and blunders, as I always call them, which is in honor of the Don Rickles, Steve Lawrence blooper show on ABC that I think lasted for about 2 years as a competitor to TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes, which was Dick Clark's and Ed McMahon's show, which I believe that Dick Clark did own the right to the word blooper, some trademark to it for the TV show, and so that's why Don Rickles' show was foul ups, bleeps, and blunders. So anyway, of course, at the top of my list, in terms of plan miscues, late deferral deposits. I cannot stress enough how I see that as the most common error, probably because it's the most frequent error. My feeling is that if a plan sponsors late on deferrals once, that means they are late more than one time. I've never had a plan sponsor who's missed it once, only miss it once. They miss it multiple times. Um, it's like people who don't pay rent or don't pay their mortgage. They don't screw up once usually. It means that they've screwed up countless times. And that's really what happens. To me, it's such a avoidable error, but it's something that's so common because somebody's sleeping at the wheel and not allowing um, for people, to move that money. Back in the old days when we had that 15th day of the following month, everything was done by check. I was working at TPA, and the guy who was running the place, probably if I looked at my career and the one guy I liked the least, or I would say hated, was the guy running a certain TPA shop in New York City. Reason I couldn't stand him is we butted heads, and I think we butted heads because as the attorney, I was quite vocal about our operations and the problems that I saw and the foul ups and mistakes that I had to fix. But that's a whole nother point. What was funny about him was it still was like 2005 and 2006, and we developed this thing called the internet, and we developed ACH. Um, to allow for fast moving of employer money or salary deferral money into a Schwab account or Fidelity or Matrix or whoever the custodial account was with. But this guy still demanded checks. He still demanded that the employer sent him deferral checks via FedEx. And of course, that was the time before the Department of Labor laid down the law about the getting in it as soon as possible. So I can only imagine if that TPA still existed, what my friend would do with these checks, especially if checks got lost or whatever it was. But when dealing with the 15th day of the following month, it was okay to ask for the employer to send a check and somehow it get this deposit on the custodial account. Now we can't do that anymore. Thanks to the internet, thanks to ACH. Department of Labor expects the plan sponsor is going to put that money in within 3 days. And there's no excuse. There's absolutely no excuse as to why it shouldn't be in there. Yet it just happens quite often with a plan sponsor. And from experience, how does that happen? When you have an employer that, and I've had 2 restaurant groups, both around the same time, going in with the Department of Labor with plan audits, Department of Labor audits. They were caught with late deferral deposits. You had 2 restaurant groups, one really well known and the other one not so well known, but they had restaurants all over the country. The problem with that is, payroll was run at each location. And more importantly, they had multiple payroll providers. So not only did they have ADP, they might have had Paychecks. They might have had some of the old, local payroll providers. I forget who it was, but it's not the fault of the payroll providers that the employer is late in depositing the money into the 401k plan. But it happens, and the problem with it, like I said, multiple years, multiple payrolls, and dealing with the calculations and how to fix it, and it's a huge problem, especially if it's caught on an IRS and DOL audit. These things take forever. I had this one restaurant group, a year and a half it took to finally close out the audit. It was painful. It was painful because of the information that they requested. And of course, when the employer moves TPAs or moves payroll providers, they may not have all the information readily available for the auditor to digest. So, not a lot of fun. And I just see a huge amount of these problems. Second on my list these days now is failure to file a 5500 and going through the delinquent filing fiduciary compliance program with the Department of Labor. I had this recurring dream, and I don't have it anymore. But I had this recurring dream that I would be back in high school or I'd be back in college, and I didn't, or maybe sometimes in law school, and I didn't go to the course for the entire semester, and there was a final the next day, or I missed the final, or whatever it may be. And it covered all different subjects. I think I had one time a dream about, Hebrew class, or a dream about high school Spanish. I've had dreams about law school classes. And, you wake up and you finally realize it was all a dream, and you're satisfied. Which, of course, reminds me of the movie Top Secret, where Val Kilmer plays a guy by the name of Nick Rivers. He's in a East German prison, and he has the recurring dream about the final being that day, and he hasn't been there all semester, and he's having a nightmare about it. And he wakes up, and he realizes he's been beaten. He's being beaten by these prison guards. And he says, "Oh my God, thank God it was only a dream," which, of course, the funny part was he'd rather take the abuse from these prison guards than having a nightmare about his class. But anyway, speaking, I'm digressing, of course, but, the 5500s, failure to file the 5500s to me reminds me of that dream. How is it possible that an employer fails to file a 5500? And there's so many reasons why. They didn't have a TPA, or they expected a certain TPA to do it, and they didn't. And there was a change of TPAs. And of course, the problem with the 5500s is, like the late deferral deposits, it's not something that happens once. It happens multiple times. And, that's a huge problem. Thankfully, we have the delinquent filing fiduciary compliance, program out there. So instead of paying tens of thousands of dollars, and of course the DOL has jacked up the late filing fee to a couple $1,000 a day. The IRS has their fee as well. Thankfully, these DFECP programs are there. So, like, for example, yesterday I filed for an employer, and the maximum penalty was $1,500. And that's huge when they were late for 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. That's huge. It's a huge cost savings. They don't see it that way because they have to shell out $1,500. But, when I've seen letters, with $50,000 penalty letters or $10,000 penalty letters, $1,500 is a drop in the bucket. For a larger plan, $4,000 is a drop in the bucket. And thankfully, we have electronic filing. It makes it so much easier to do it. Back in the old days when we had to mail things, it wasn't as instantaneous in terms of the satisfaction in fixing it. But, thankfully, it's there. And thankfully, it's, being fixed. And speaking of screw-ups, one huge screw-up that I've had a couple of IRS VCP submissions are dealing with RMDs. Now, of course, for all fans of this podcast, all 35 folks of you, you know that the Secure Act increased the RMD age from 70.5 to 72 starting in 2020. That's great, but that doesn't mean that plans aren't going to screw up on the 70.5s. And it's a perplexing error to me because, I don't know, for people who are probably not fans of retirement plan history, but I'm fascinated about 401a9, the RMDs, because the RMD provisions is one of those things that constantly changed over time. I may not have all the history done correctly because a lot of this predates my time in the business, but there was a time, I think before TEFRA, um, where there was no 70.5s, and there was a TEFRA 242B election where the 5% owner, I believe, as long as they got a waiver, they had to put an election form to defer the 70.5 until retirement, and then in TRA 6 they changed the law again. They might have changed the law again. There were a couple of law changes. I think OBRA might have been, or actually, I think it was. I'm sorry. OBRA was dealing with the compensation and the rollovers. I think it was the Tax Reform Act of '86 that said that 5% owners and other employees had to take out an RMD at 70.5. And then in the Taxpayer Relief Act of '97, which I know so well, because that summer when it passed and signed into law was the summer that I was going to Boston University for my tax LLM program. I know that they changed the RMD rules again, and non 5% owners could defer payment of their accounts until retirement. So they didn't have to take an RMD until they actually retired. 5% owners don't have such luck, and that's how the current law, thankfully. All these changes since TEFRA and whatnot, it hasn't changed in 22 years. And the problem with that error, it really just has to do with the fact that the 5% owner, they didn't take out an RMD. And usually that happens because the TPA may not know that the person is a 5% owner. They may not have that information because the plan sponsor didn't provide it. It's a huge error. And then, of course, sometimes the TPA does screw up. The 5% owner rule, it's different from the HCE rule because the HCE rule, we could figure out based on compensation whether somebody's an HCE or not. Sometimes TPA doesn't have that 5% owner information readily available. So, that's certainly an issue. And it happens. It happens quite a bit. I'll never forget one time. Thankfully, the IRS has a VCP program for these plans because, back in the day, this is going back, 15, 16, no, it's going back almost 20 years. When I was a lowly paid associate at a law firm affiliated with a third-party administration firm, this TPA bought other smaller TPAs. And the problem when you're a TPA and you buy other smaller TPAs, it's the joke that, you've now bought somebody else's problems. That's always a joke and knock against adoption. Oh, you're adopting somebody else's problems, which, that's the joke. It's a cruel joke you hear about adoption. But I do think that, when you're a TPA and you buy another TPA, you do buy somebody else's problems. And, this TPA that they bought in Philadelphia had lots of problems. What kind of problems? Well, every single employee defined benefit plan was overfunded. Every ERISA covered DB plan was underfunded. So anyway, they goofed on a solo DB plan RMD. Guy shells out the 50% penalty, looking at a $100,000 tax bill. Pays the 5330, pays the excise tax, and then I'm entrusted with talking to the IRS and their advocates and trying to get that money back. And it took some months. I did get the money back for these clients, which was great. The funniest part was, of course, my boss, Harvey, may he rest in peace. He says, send them a bill. Send them a bill for the work that you did. And I did. It was a couple $1,000, whatever it was. And of course, they called back and said, Harvey, the TPA you bought caused this error. We're not paying your bill. So Harvey, the gentleman that he was, waived the bill. But the funny part of the story was, afterwards, they sent me a thank you, a $50 gift in the mail. And that's the only time I ever got a gift from a client. So it was kind of nice. Of course, people who are sarcastic will say, well, you saved them $100,000 and they only gave you $50. Well, you know what? $50 is more than I expected. But anyway, these RMD issues are a huge problem. They're a huge, huge problem. And thankfully, we have the IRS VCP program where we, have a voluntary compliance. Plan sponsor admits their goof and, tries to have the IRS bless the idea that they will have a distribution and the participant will not get socked with that RMD excise tax penalty. So that's a huge, huge, load off their back. The next error that I see a lot nowadays is obviously compensation. The failure to abide by the terms of the plan document. Plan sponsor assumes compensation is defined one way when it's defined one other way. So, for example, they thought they excluded bonuses from the definition of compensation for purposes of deferrals and employer contributions, and they find out the hard way that they were wrong. This happens quite a bit. Especially when plan sponsors have out-of-the-box compensation definitions. So it's a huge, huge problem, and it's something that really is not something that people catch on until years later. The TPA may catch on, or the joke is that people don't read the plan document. There was a Chris Rock joke, which I certainly won't repeat because of the racial aspect of it. But to throw off that joke, I used to joke that if you wanted to hide something from the plan administrators that I worked with at this certain TPA, if you wanted to hide it from them, put it in a plan document file because they never read the plan document file. So it's based off an old Chris Rock joke. But yeah, it's seriously, it's a mistake that takes years in the making, and both people figure out, plan sponsors practice and the plan document are two different things. And that's a huge problem, especially if there is a contribution owed. Whether it's a missed salary deferral opportunity and or employer contribution, these are things that have to be fixed. And it's a huge, huge problem. Believe me, I know. I've submitted through the voluntary compliance programs on these problems, and I think it's important that a TPA, if you are a TPA or if you're an advisor or even a plan sponsor, make sure read that definition of compensation and make sure that it fits what you're doing, fits what the plan sponsor is doing. If they're excluding bonuses, make sure that's what the plan document reads. If they're including bonuses, make sure the plan document reads that way. If there's some kind of crazy definition of compensation, like for example, dealing with automobile allowances for auto dealerships, make sure that that's covered as well. So, these are, obviously some of the errors that I've come across. Missed deferral opportunities, just segueing from the definition of compensation, that's another big issue that I see quite often. Thankfully, IRS changed the language so they give you 90 days free before you have to put in a QNEC. That's a huge changer for us because, it does, these 30-day or 45 or 90-day problems, they are certainly an issue. So these are some of the issues, like I said, some of the problems that I'm seeing now. And, just some of the compliance issues that I think that you all should really consider. And speaking with the plan sponsors, and if you are a plan sponsor, making sure that you don't have these issues. So, these are like I said, the issues that we're coming across, and hopefully you've been entertained on some of my insight on some of these common errors that I see in my day-to-day practice. In conclusion, like I said, you got to show for these events. I got to pay for my kids' Hanukkah gifts and vacation somehow. So go to that 401ksite.com for further information at 4K National Conference and that 401k conference, the regional events that we're going to have in Houston, St. Louis, Minneapolis. So anyway, hope you enjoy us, and hopefully Daniel will be back next week. Take care.